Hello everyone, this is Jimmy Beach. Welcome to our exposure webinar today. In the next few minutes, we will go forward through taking the first steps when processing images using exposure. I'll touch on all the major points in the workflow today. Exposure is our advanced non-destructive raw photo organizer and editor. You can use it to copy images from camera cards, apply editing adjustments, creative effects, export finished photos, and you can even print from right within Exposure. A quick history lesson about Exposure is that over 15 years ago, Exposure was originally developed for film photographers. The transition from developing analog film in the darkroom using chemistry to processing images in digital only using a computer was a tough thing to grasp. And Exposure's accurate film emulation presets helped make that change by giving photographers the look and feel of their favorite film types once again. So as we get into the demonstration today, I want to point out that there will be time at the end reserved for answering any specific questions if you have them. There might also be, or it may be answered during the lesson as well. All right, so let's get right into it. As we begin, I will, well, actually, let's just start from the beginning. When you're organizing images, that's where you begin. So ingesting images from cards is the first step in the process. That's usually where the workflow begins, so that's where we'll start. When you put in a camera card into the computer, you can it will automatically open up this dialog in Exposure. Now, some people have complained about having this dialog come up, and you can change that in the preferences. I will tell you how to do that in a second. But let's say we plugged in our camera card, and it will come up just like this in your computer. Now, Exposure handles a lot of different RAW files, in addition to TIFF files, JPEG files, DNG files, and even Photoshop PSD files. And so notice the number sections in this screen that are labeled here at the top. Number 1 is to select the source. We can see here that we have the camera card selected. We have number 2 is to review the images. This is where we can select which ones we want to copy. I have them all selected from this camera card so that you can see them here. And number 3 is to select the destination and set options. So you can set a standard location right here on your desktop at the top. I have a photos folder on my desktop. That's what this says right here. And usually inside of it, I create a subfolder. So I will add a subfolder for the images right here that we're going to copy. And they were taken by Kyle Allen. Okay, so Kyle Allen. And we can even convert them if we want to convert them to a DNG format so that they're more easily readable in a bunch of different programs. We can use that. We can change the name of our files as they're being copied if we want to. Here's a naming convention that I use. This is the name of the people and then what the shoot was, and if there's more than one card, and then I'd put the image number in there as well. So that's just a code that I use, but you can use whichever one you want, and you can even save it as a preset so you can access it quickly. I'll turn that off. And you can even add metadata to help with organizing and copyright on your images. You can add your images to collections as they're being copied to your computer, apply keywords, and even apply some of your favorite presets as the images are copied. Okay, so now that we have all of that stuff done, I'm going to say OK, and Exposure will begin the copy process. Now, there's no modules. Oh, that goes really fast. There are no modules inside of Exposure, so that means that any of the time you can access all the photos, even when they're being downloaded to your computer. So we'll go to that folder on our desktop. You can see right here, desktop, photos, right there, and then Kyle Allen. And these were the images we just copied to our computer. Okay, and you can see that right now we're looking at the JPEG preview, but if you watch closely, you'll see that those JPEG previews might change a little bit as we're discussing, and that is where you can see exposure is rendering the raw image in there. See how it goes down that way. Now, you can immediately begin working on your images inside of Exposure because you don't have a module or catalog to deal with. So all of the commands that you want to do are available all of the time. Even when the images are being copied, I can apply things like star ratings or flags or color labels to organize my images, or I can even go in and apply some basic adjustments to make, here I'll just hit auto, make some basic adjustments just to preview those images and see which ones I like and don't like. Now that can happen when there is a progress bar right above exposure here as you're copying images from the camera card. And imagine that you're copying thousands of images to the camera card. It might take some time, so you can just drag that slider, or you can just drag that progress bar out of the way and start immediately beginning your editing process. Now, what happens when we edit these images? So where is our catalog, right? You gotta have a catalog somewhere. So let me open up a Finder window. Okay, so as we look inside of our Finder window, we'll see on the desktop here, I have my Photos folder, and I'm looking at images here that I've had copied to the computer. So inside of any of these folders, you can see that there is an Exposure software folder, and this is where our Sidecar files live. So inside of the Sidecar file, that includes any edits that we make, any organization flags, or any keywords. Any of that stuff is going to be saved inside these Sidecar files. So that makes it really easy if you want to back this folder up. For example, you can just drag that onto your other drive, like a connected passport or something like that, and back that up, including all of your edits. Okay, so that's one of the things where Exposure is catalog free. Everything lives inside of that, so we don't have to deal with managing a catalog. And this also makes it so there's no single point of failure should things go awry. Okay, now let's talk about organizing real quick. This is something that we can do really quick inside of Exposure, and then we'll get into doing photo editing. So the folder structure, as you may notice in Exposure, right here on the left side, is the exact same as your computer hard drive. Let me close the navigator at the top. You can see here in the folders panel, I'll drag down, you have a bunch of folders in here. On my desktop is a photos folder, and then I have a bunch of photos or folders inside of that, just like what I showed you here in the Finder window. We have our photos folder, and inside of that is a bunch of folders of images, just like here. Okay, so that makes it a little bit easier. You don't have to get to know where you saved all of your files or anything like that, like when you're juggling with a catalog. You won't have to deal with that at all. So now let's, also, while I'm here, I'm going to talk about collections. Collections are a great way to organize images from various locations on your computer without making duplicate files. So you can create as many collections as you'd like. You can see here, I have one here, family photos. You can even create collections within collections for an easy to navigate hierarchy. So you can see family photos, and then you have these 3 super amazing people inside of the family. So these are images of just these individuals. Anyway, so I'm going to close the collections and we'll go back. So now let's talk about organizing and culling using our organizing features inside of Exposure. Exposure uses flags, star ratings, and color labels when you're sorting images. Let me close this right here on the right. Oops. And I'll close this one on the left. If you are missing your folders panel, you can right-click inside of an empty space or right-click on the panel, and then you want to show all is an option right here, if that's ever missing. Little tidbit for you. Okay, so flags, color labels, and star ratings. You can assign any of these with the keyboard shortcuts. Now, keyboard shortcuts are really simple and easy to use inside of Exposure. Plus marks it as a pick. I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to navigate through images in the folder. minus flags as a reject. To remove a flag, hit the same thing again. I'll hit minus here, and it will remove that flag. You can make it quicker by holding down the Shift button, and then plus and minus, and that will automatically navigate to the next image in the batch as you select the rating or the flag. You can see it goes really quick. Now, we can do the same thing if we're going to apply our color labels to this shoot, and that will be some further classification. So let me shrink these images a little bit. You can see which ones I have flagged and reject. I will quickly go through here just for the demonstration purposes. I'm not actually looking at these, I'm just showing you how to do it. This is actually really good when you make a first pass through all your images to make sure that, the flash went off and all that stuff. So that's the first pass I will make when I'm editing a shoot. Quickly go through, get rid of everything that I know I'm not going to use first, mark it as reject, and then I delete those out of there. But you can do however you want. So anyway, now I have all these flagged as pick flags. So I'm going to apply a filter. So now I have 46 images. I'm going to apply the filter. Now I only have 30 images. So what this is going to do is help me cull my shoot down to just the very best ones. Okay, so now what I can do, let's say, is I will apply stars to these images. Okay, so stars can be used, numbers, they're right down here. These are the filters in the bottom. Also, let me make these a little bit bigger. On the bottom of these thumbnails, you can see that there's stars at the bottom. And you can just click to select which star you'd like. Now, you can also use the numbers on the keyboard. Numbers 1 through 5 will apply a star rating to the image. Same thing, we can use the keyboard shortcut to navigate through. Apply the star rating, keyboard shortcut again, just like so. Or we can hold down Shift and apply our ratings as quickly as our eyes and fingers can move. Okay, so I went through that. Oops, that's way too small. So now we can see, as I zoom back in here, we can see that each one of these also has a star rating applied to it. Now we can quickly use our filter at the bottom to try to narrow it down. Once again, I'm going to make anything that is greater than or equal to 4 stars. So those are the really good ones, the primo images. So now I'm down to 20. Next time, we can go back through and we can filter it one more time by using the color labels. Now you can use these however you'd like to. I particularly, in my workflow, I'll use them to flag images at the beginning of my workflow as preview images. Then I will tag yellow. I'll use red for preview images. Yellow I use for black and white images. Green labels I use for finished images. And that's kind of how I do things. But anyway, let's see. We can use the numbers 6, 7, 8, 9. And if there was a 10 button, we would have one for purple, but we don't have one. So you can also access them from, let me make this a little bit bigger. You can access them from right-clicking right here on the right lower corner of the thumbnail preview area and select them right here from the menu. So I'm going to say, I'll choose that one as red. This means I'm going to edit this one first. And typically I will pick a look and then pick another look. So I'll make that one a 6. And here we go. And this one. Yeah. There. So that's what I would do, right? So these images here are the 5 that I'm going to show to that client, right? That's how I would do things. Okay, but you can apply it however you want. I'm going to remove my filter and go back to seeing all of my images. Whoops, that was the wrong button. Hey, look, that's the print dialog. Anyway, I hit Command 0, or Command O, excuse me, to remove my filter here. Now I can see all the images again. You can see down here on the right, it says 46 total shown. Okay, so now we have an idea of how we can use our culling or our different applications of stars and flags and color labels to cull our images in exposure. I also did throw out a bunch of keyboard shortcuts there, and I don't want to leave you hanging. You can find all of them right here from within the Help menu in Exposure. Keyboard shortcuts are listed. Also, While on the subject of keyboard shortcuts, if you used to be a Lightroom user, for example, you can actually customize your keyboard shortcuts in the Preferences panel. I'll show you real quick. The Preferences comes up, and under, here it goes, it opens like this to General. We'll go to Shortcuts, and you can see here we can make our own shortcuts if we wanted to assign some new command. Inside of the presets is a Lightroom compatibility layout option, which if you are a Lightroom user, that might be really handy for you to smooth the transition into using exposure. Also, there's the owner's manual right here from the help menu, and that is right here. And inside of that, there's help on using every single one of the tools inside of exposure. So if you ever have any questions, you can go right there. Also inside the manual are links to videos to help you to learn how to use exposure. Now that we've talked about organizing, I'm going to talk about editing or processing our images. Okay, so I'm going to go to this folder. And then I'm going to close the folders panel because I don't need to have it open anymore. Okay, so I have found some images inside of this folder. I'm just going to use my color filters here, and I use trusty purple. Purple is a color that I don't normally use when I'm filtering, but I used it today because these images here are the ones that I want to highlight. Okay, so you can see how quickly it is just to filter and look at the images that you want to work on. All right, so we're talking about processing the images. There are two ways that you can apply edits inside of exposure or adjustments. They can be used to correct issues in a photo, or they can be used creatively. So correcting issues in photos is typically the first things to address when you're editing. So that would be, let me reset every single one of these. I'm just going to hit reset. Now you can see that I did some other work to them, and some of them changed a little bit, and that's okay. I want to show you how I got to where I came from. Now, when we're looking at these images, we want to correct issues inside of them, okay? That's where we start our process. So correcting issues would be things like, let me open one of these up at full size. Here we go. So correcting issues would be things like lens correction. So lens correction inside of exposure can be done automatically, as you see here. It automatically chose a profile, and it's based off of the film or the camera and lens. I can also choose to do it manually if I wanted to, instead, to make any distortion corrections, as well as vignette corrections or chromatic aberration corrections. I'm going to leave that on profile because I think it does a good job. You can just turn that off by switching the panel off and on right here. And you can see what the effects do at the corners of that photo. Okay. Also, after lens correction is sharpening. Sharpening would be the next thing that I would apply, and then noise reduction. So sharpening is something I would do when I'm zoomed in at 100%. So if I just click on the image there, you can see it zooms in to 100%. Sometimes I'll even click one more time to 200%. Now when I apply sharpening, I would hold down the Alt button, which is a special key. It's called a modifier. So always check the Alt button for sharpening. We're going to hold down Alt and apply amount. And I'll drag that way up so that we can see the effect on the image. Then I will hold down Alt and drag the radius slider. This helps me select or show how wide the sharpening is going to be. And we can see it's real strong right here on his collar, so I don't want that to be too much. The details slider here is going to, at higher values, will add noise or sharpen noise, so I'm not going to make that very high. And masking allows us to select how much contrast there needs to be in an edge for it to be sharpened. Okay, so now with all that said, I'm going to turn my amount back down, and then we can even turn off and on the sharpening. There we go. Ah, yeah, that looks good. Okay. Noise reduction is the same way. We can add luminance, color, and smoothing. The noise reduction inside of exposure is based on a profile. Now, this is very unique, but it is based on this profile, and that has to do with the camera sensor size and a lot of other information like that. You can increase the amount of noise reduction. For example, in luminance, let's see if we have any here that we can see. Okay, we can see a little bit of color fluctuation if you look really close, so we can apply more color noise removal to mitigate that. You can see it right there. I don't want to do too much as it can smooth. Even places in faces and things like that do have some noise in them, and it looks good. So there we go. It has some color noise. Smoothing will do another. It will remove more noise and add a little bit of a smoothing effect. So, but this image is not particularly noisy. So after noise reduction, we've done lens correction, we've done noise reduction and sharpening. We would do transform tools. Transform tools would be things to correct for perspective or skew or anything like that to make the image, read a specific way. Especially with architectural shots and things like that, you need to make sure that those, vertical lines stay vertical. So let's close that. All right. So now also we can use the crop tool to crop or rotate and straighten. Let me hit the escape key there. Let's see here. Okay, so here's a good example of the crop tool. So I'm going to hit the crop tool here, and I'm going to use, instead of just using the angle like this to adjust the image, which you can usually do pretty quick work of straightening things out. I'll hit reset. I'm going to use the angle button here and just click on the level and then draw a line in the image to what I want to be straight. And exposure will do the rest. I'm going to leave the aspect ratio original, and I'll just hit close, and then it'll accept those changes. Now I have a nice straight line here, and the tree, well, the trees can lean a little bit, but that's where my eye was drawn, so made the correction there. So now let's talk about creative editing. So we've moved beyond the technical correction issues in our images, but now we get to do the fun stuff. So I'm going to open this dock on the left side and then open the presets panel. Let's close all of those presets. Okay. So inside of the presets panel, Exposures has a ton of options for you. Exposure's rendering engine was built to automatically emulate film, even down to the subtleties of individual film grains. And the presets in Exposure will simulate a variety of different iconic film looks, as you can see them listed here. Let's make those. So you can make it in list view so that you can see the names really clearly, or however you really want to. All of this stuff you can move and organize inside of Exposure to work for your particular workflow needs. Now, the presets can be used unmodified inside of Exposure. For example, I can just click on one of these presets and it'll apply to the image. Now, we can also use them for creative starting points, or we can create, we can create them for starting points for our own creative looks and make our own new thing. So I'll apply this one by clicking, and I'll point out that you can see here in the layers panel, I'll make that dock stay. In the layers panel, our new layer set, or our layer says Kodak Portra 400 and VC. Now, I think that means vibrant color. Okay, so we can also add another preset on top of this preset to create our own, let's get another color one, to create our own unique look. So I have a color photo with dust and scratches. I actually am going to add that in a new layer to blend it together. So I'll just click and drag it right over here onto add new layer. And here we go. We can see color photo dust and scratches there in the second layer. And now I can mix the blend of this together with the opacity slider. So now I have a completely new look, just like that. I can hold down the backslash key at any time to view the before and after of my image as I'm working. And okay, so I did just introduce layers inside of this workflow, and I'm not really liking what I'm doing here, so I just wanted to touch on that we can stack these different presets together inside of Exposure. It's really easy to do. However, I'm going to undo this second layer by deleting. All right. So now let's talk about doing some preset or adding some effects or making editing changes to our images. So I'm going to hit escape to go back to our thumbnail view. I will shrink the left dock here. Now I have all these images. These have all been reset. This is straight out of the camera raw, except for this one right here. This one right here, in which we applied. I'm going to reset that. in which we did the cropping. So, cropping and rotating to this image. So now that we're going to do some editing, the first thing that I want to point out are the edits on the basic panel. So the edits on the basic panel, it has auto written right here on the left side. Now, inside of exposure, you can make a quick handful of fundamental adjustments if that's all your photos will need. And the quick and fastest way to do that is with the auto button. So I'm going to select an image. Actually, I'm going to select all the images inside of our folder, and I'll just hit auto. Now, exposure will intelligently apply adjustments to each one of these images to develop them so that they look they have a consistent look to them, and they're developed in the way that I particularly care for. Now, the edits that were applied in the auto setting were not the exact same. I wanted to point that out. You can see here the highlights is -4. This one, the highlights is -7. This one, the highlights is -13. So you can see that each one of these images exposure read and then applied those adjustments to make those or to develop those. So that's the first step. I would say, I'm going to select them all. I'm editing all of these at the same time. I'm going to rename this bottom layer Basics. No, Basic Edits. That sounds better. There we go. So now, the reason I did that is that's separate from any of the other effects that I apply to this layer. So if I wanted to make some fundamental adjustments to the behavior of this or the look of these images, I can do that on that layer. Okay? So let's talk about basic tone and color. Let's see here. I'm going to go to just right here in the basic panel. You can see that there are some standard adjustments here. I want to point out that when you work inside of exposure, any panel that you have open, work at the top of that panel and then work your way down through the sliders. Reason being is that if you make an adjustment with the exposure slider, that will have an impact on the contrast slider, which will have an impact on the white slider and the shadow slider, etc., etc., etc. So as I make my adjustments inside of exposure, what I want to do is think about this as exposure as being the big adjustment, and then everything else down below it is about making refinements to that. So exposure values first, then we'll make some adjustments to the highlights, then we'll make adjustments to the white values to dial those in. Now, we'll talk about color effects next. In the color panel, we can see there's tons of color toning effects that we can apply. Here at the top, color filter is essentially like putting a plastic or glass color filter over the end of the lens of the camera. So it will add effects like bluing or green, whichever color that lens was or that filter was that you placed over the end of the lens. Now, it's also really, you can customize these as much as you want inside of exposure, or you can turn them back off. You can also do simple things like cooling down an image or warming it up with this slider. Down on the bottom are detailed adjustments where you can make edits to the image's hue, saturation, and luminance values of the colors. Now, these are really handy ways that you could make some tweaks. Let's see here. So inside of this image, for example, the hue of our greens in this background look a little yellow to me. So if we look at the greens slider, we have yellow on the left and cyan on the right. So if I drag this a little bit more cyan, we can see that the greens in the image immediately start to take on a whole new, more vibrant look. And that's what I'm going for this shot. Okay. Now, if we can do the same thing with saturation. Let's say that there's a place in the image that isn't saturated enough. Let's say his suit here, we want to make this more blue. I can take the blues slider and increase the saturation, and then we can see that his suit is now popping just a little bit more. We can do the same thing here with the luminance, and that what we can use here is, let's say this is a really cut and dry example. So we have greens again. Let's say I want to make those greens darker because I have a lot of light green and yellow tones back here in the background. I can drag the greens channel down to make that darker, and you can see those adjustments. Okay. Now, let's One more time, let's look at the tone curve panel. It's another great way that you can make adjustments to your images and exposure. Tone curve panel. Actually, I want to point out here at the top of this panel that anytime that you see one of these drop downs where it says preset, there are presets. And you can take advantage of using some common presets for the tools in that panel by accessing them here. For example, this Milky Blacks preset I use quite often. And it applies a curve just like so. That's really gentle. Now, if you use the tone curve, or if you are at home here with the curve editor, if you use this in Photoshop or Lightroom, you're going to be right at home with this one in exposure. You just click on points in the curve editor and move them around to make adjustments. Same thing with the points on the very ends. This is the black point here. That was the one that was adjusted for Milky Blacks, and this is the white point up here, and that will kind of taper off that edge. Okay, so yeah, you can also make adjustments if you are not super savvy with making point adjustments like this on the tone curve. You can use the sliders down below to effectively make minuscule or finite changes to the curve, and you can see it in a dotted line here inside of that panel. Also, you can add split toning inside of this panel, which is a great way of applying two different colors to an image based off of the luminance values. So we can select one. There's a bunch of them for black and white. That's typically where you see these kind of effects, but there's a few for color as well. So as you add them, you can select each one and make as many customizations as you'd like. And here we go. That's the highlights one. And we can tell that where we would like it to appear in the image. Here's on the midtones, or we can make it on the very brightest values, however you'd really like. So there we go. Just like that. You can also save any of these as a preset with this button on the right side. Save as preset. You can define your own. All right. So now that we have the tone curve ready, let's talk about more creative effects. So I'm going to go to another photo here. We've seen this one before. Okay, creative effects, the spot heal tool. No, this is not the one that I wanted. Let's reset this. Yes, it is the one I wanted. See right down here? Spot heal tool. We're going to take care of this guy. Okay, so the spot heal tool. We're going to click on what looks like a band-aid. The spot heal tool has two modes. That's heal and clone. Now, for this example, I'm going to use the clone brush. The clone brush does a little bit better when it has textures around the area that you are removing. And so we can see right here, I'm going to make a selection. And then it will automatically choose where it's going to sample from, and then I can make some adjustments to make it look just right. I find that it's easier if you do this with multiple small areas so that you can control them a little bit better. And I show that workflow in a video on our website if you want more description, or if you want me to go a little bit slower. Here we go. Now, after you make a spot, you can still make adjustments to it. This is now the active spot. You can see it's selected. So I can make that a little bit larger if I didn't quite get everything out of there. There. So now that thing has disappeared. There we go. Now I did hit reset after I did that, and I had that straight before, so sorry, now it's crooked. Anyway, okay, so let's also talk about vignettes. Vignettes, a great way to draw attention on your subject. Let's go to another image here that'll be good for a vignette. Okay, it's a great storytelling photo right here. So I already did my auto adjustments, so this thing is tweaked and ready to go. I'll add a vignette right here, and we'll just select from the presets. And inside of exposure, there's tons of different ways that you can, there's tons of presets that you can choose from. You can also quickly make some organic looking vignettes. So I'm going to choose the location. I want it to be right there on their hands. I'm going to make it really small so it's just about them. And then I have my amount really high so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to use the distortion slider here to make that look a little bit more analog, like it was made by hand. I'll hit the random seed button a few times. There we go. There it is. And then I will soften it up just a bit. And now I'll turn my amount back down. Okay, great. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so now I have a vignette on there. Great way to draw attention here to mom and dad as they watch their daughter over here on the left-hand side get married away. Another way that you can help do this direct attention is using bokeh. And bokeh panel is right here in exposure. I said bokeh for probably 10 years before someone corrected me. That's actually pronounced bokeh. Bokeh is the visual quality of the out of focus areas of your image. By definition, that's what it means. So I'm going to add some bokeh, and then you will see that it automatically blends the areas, or blurs the areas on the edges of the effect, or on the image. It's controllable by this round region in the center. So I can move it over and make things appear how I want them to. However, I don't necessarily want the round image or round focus region for this one. I think this straight one might work a little bit better. So all I'm doing here is I'm going to subtly blend the detail in this bunch of foliage that's happening on the side here of the image. I can make more adjustments to make this as custom as I want, but it's a subtle way of adding an element that will help focus your attention right here and on this left edge in the photo. Exposure's grain controls. Let's talk about those. Grain is right here in exposure. Exposure has controls for grain that you can't find in other software. It looks like real grain. So let's take a look at places that you would normally find grain in exposure. So you can see here that there's a little bit of some noise in the highlights, and there's some in midtones. And then here in the blacks, you can't really see anything. That's because there's no grain on. So I'll just add from one of the presets that's really, really over the top so we can see what it looks like on the photo. That's just for sake of demonstration. We can see how strong and crunchy that grain is, or the grain clusters are. And we can make as many adjustments as we want to manipulate those. So we can apply them in, we can take the amount of what we see away from the midtones, but we can still leave them in the highlights if we choose, and we can take them lower in the shadows. Or we can mix them up however we want. Also, we can make them more or less rough, and even add more or less color to that. And post-processing or push processing will also darken the image as well as increase the amount of grain that you see. Now, if the grain looks a little large for your photo, like it does in this one, we can make the size of that larger or smaller. So here I go from a 35 millimeter camera to a 50 millimeter, and it goes to much smaller, and then to a 4x5 viewfinder. You can see the grain inside of the preview image is hardly noticeable. So we can choose grain size like this per our use. So now we have custom grain that looks great. All right, now let's talk about overlays, which are light effects, borders, and textures. Now, these are great ways to enhance your photos if they need it. So things like light effects, you can just click here and then choose from 1,000 different varieties of, well, I don't know if there's 1,000, lots of different varieties of overlays that you can put on your images in exposure. And they range all over the place, from glowy things that you put over the top of the photo to little hazy bits that go just around the edge. I have a rule of thumb that I don't like to introduce new image color or new colors into the photo, so I like to blend whatever I apply with what's in the photo right then. So in this particular situation, this white would probably work. So we can manipulate these to work however we want to. We can make them a little bit easier on the eye, and we can even change the blend mode of them so that they do different things to our photos, like this. Whole bunch of creative options here. And that's a little bright. There we go. Okay, so now we've kind of ran through all of the different options that we have and things that you can do to your images, or to edit your images inside of exposure. Now is a great time to start to demonstrate in a real world scenario how you can apply, or how you can use the layers inside of exposure to apply your adjustments. So let me click on an image here. Okay, this is cute. Oh, yeah, this is a great one. Okay, so real world scenario. Okay, so what we've done, I'm going to hold down the backslash key. We can see that it's just a little bit on the light side, and with the edits, it's a little bit more saturated, a little bit more crisp. But I do see an issue in this image, and that is right here on the eye. So what happened here is the person that was holding the reflector was wearing a bright blue dress. Okay, so I mean, this stuff happens all the time, and we can see the reflection in his glasses. Okay, so again, this is a real world scenario, so what are we going to do? Well, I need to remove the blue effect from this eye so that this just kind of goes away and we just see his beautiful shining face. So I'm going to hit Add Layer. I have a new layer here, and I'm firstly going to mask. I'll use the brush tool. We can see it's selected when you select the thumbnail here. If you hover over it, it will show you where the mask is being applied by highlighting red. Just going to click here. I've set my brush parameters. I'll click and I will apply a mask quickly to this area. Okay, and it's giving me a prompt telling me that it's not going to do anything. That's because we haven't set it to yet. Now that we have that applied, I'm going to close the brush tool. I'm going to go down to the color panel, and at the bottom under detailed adjustments is the advanced color editor. So I click that button and up comes the advanced color editor. Now this is really simple. On the left side we convert from, and I want to choose the blue. On the right side I choose what color I want it to be. So I'll choose his skin, but I want like a moderate tone of his skin. Okay, great. Now you can see where I have this Technicolor stuff going on his face, and we will make some corrections to that in just a second. So the first thing I'll do is I'll start to feather out the edges of the original selection as to what I want to change. And then we can also start to, you can see as I make adjustments here, what is selected inside the image, and you can see how it changes. So I'm going to make sure that I have all the stuff that I need. Good. Now I'm going to make some adjustments here. I'll just drag this color around to see where it's starting to make those tweaks on his face. I think I want it to be more orange, or more yellow, excuse me, to try to blend that in with the skin tones. And I think this pink is too much, so let's remove that. All right. So now we can choose if we want it to apply to the entire gamut of saturation inside of the image. This essentially tells it, or will refine where we are selecting inside of the photo. You can see that edits there. We can make adjustments to both sides doing this. Now I think this red color here, there, that's better. No, it's not. Okay, so now that we have this being applied to our image, now I don't necessarily want all of that effect that's being applied right here. We can see how it's giving some Technicolor look. So as I make more minuscule adjustments, you can see that it selects a better group of tones. Now we do have some stuff that we don't necessarily want to happen, but we're in the right ballpark. So if I turn this off, now I have an opacity slider. Let's rename our layer here. Glare. So now we can make this opacity slider and turn it down a little bit, which allows it to blend with the original image a little bit more. So if we turn our layer off and then back on, we can see that we've eliminated much of the impact, or almost all of the impact, of that glare from his eyes. Now, that means that we've really essentially just started editing this image, and now we can, what I would do here is apply a preset. So now we have an eye glare layer. I'm going to grab a nice warm tone preset. Here we go. I'll add Kodak Gold there on the top, drag that down a little bit because I think it's a little strong. Yep. Now I'm going to go back to the basic panel. This is still just a real world scenario. We can see that we're a little bit punchy and bright in the background here. So I'm going to drag this exposure slider down a touch. So the background looks good. Good. Now I'll add a new layer. You can see how this functionality comes in real quick. This new layer, I'm going to choose from a preset. You can see down here in the layer panel, I'm going to choose Lighten preset. And then the Lighten preset, or dodge, I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger and make the flow a little bit lower. And all I'm going to do is say that this is the area that I want to focus my attention. So this is essentially like I'm doing a vignette on this image, but I'm only doing it right there on their faces. So I still have a little bit of control over how that applies. There we go. So that's real world scenario. We did a couple of layers there. We've added some effects and we've removed that bluing. I'll hit tab. We've removed that blue tone from the glasses, that reflection. So there we go, real world scenario. Okay, now that we've done some edits to this stuff, now what? Well, if we do some photo editing, we can always go back and go through all of the things that we've done to change this image in the history panel. Inside of Exposure's history panel, here on the left, you can see every single step that you made to apply whatever look you have into this image in Exposure. Now you'll watch as I step back through here, hovering on each one of these selections, or each one of these steps, that Exposure does go all the way back to the very beginning of our editing process. Now you might ask where this information is being saved, because Exposure does not write over any of your photos, and you are correct. It saves it, wait for it, inside of the Sidecar file. So inside of Exposure, anytime that you work on images, you will see we have the original photos here with Sidecar files in the folder right here, along with them. So that makes it easy. If you are collaborating with someone, for example, your image data is stored inside the Sidecar file. So if you want to share your edits and your editing process along with the images with someone else so that you could work simultaneously, you can have a whole folder like this saved to Dropbox, for example. And as long as both computers have that Dropbox folder between them synchronized, then the images and the edits will switch or will update between those computers. So now that we have some edits applied, we have our images selected, we've done what we need to, we can export. So I'm going to select all of our images, close the history panel there, and we can export. So I'll hit Command E for export. Now inside of export, you might recognize this from the beginning of our workflow when you were copying images from your camera card. We have the destination, that's where the images will be saved. That's the folder. You can add subfolders if you'd like to. We have a file naming section where you can use whatever file naming you normally use when exporting files. Then you can set what the file settings are, what type of file it is, what the quality is, if you're going to apply sharpening. And you can add metadata again or remove it. And you can even include copyrights if you have, or watermarks if you have those set up. And then you tell it how large you would like the image to be sized as you export. So if I hit export right now, it will export the 7 images that I have selected. So I will have a folder on my desktop with 7 images in it. However, we need to make it just a little bit quicker because, you know, when you're exporting images, a lot of the time you have a few different ways that you need to export them, or a few different uses for them. I'm going to go with a quick export. And we can see here there's a number of things that are listed. Now I'm going to hit quick export and go to the dialog. In quick export, what we're looking at is our recipes for exporting our images. On the left, it tells us what they are and where they will be saved. So in the Facebook share preset, it says we're going to save it to the desktop in an export folder that in a Facebook folder. So at desktop, we'll have an export folder and Facebook folder with a Twitter folder with an Instagram folder with a 500px folder. Because I have all of these selected, you can see you can select multiple here on this panel. And then what the names will be, what settings for the files, if there's any metadata, and what image sizes will be exported here on the right. So when I hit export, not just the 7 images that I have selected here on the screen, 28 images will be selected because I have 4 different presets. So as I hit export, that would be it, and it will export the 28 images right to my desktop. So that concludes our demonstration on using exposure today. So I'm going to make a couple of comments, close down the webinar, and then we will turn our attention over to answering some of your questions. I want to thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to get in contact with other exposure users, I encourage you to do so in our Facebook group, the Exposure User Group on Facebook. If you'd like to post your work, we'd love to see it. Please do so. Share it to Instagram and use our MyExposureEdit hashtag, which will bring it to our attention. And we love seeing the stuff that people create with our software. Thank you guys, everyone, again, for your interest in exposure and for tuning in.